better than nothing.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is episode 53, and it is our second prisoner exchange. And by prisoners, we mean albums that Kelly and I are doing. I am Mike at Official Pagan, and of course, joining me.
Hey, everybody. It's Kelly at KELLYTHUL on Twitter.
Now, for you guys who aren't familiar, we did a bunch of album reviews, Alice Cooper related album reviews. A lot of people really liked them. We had a ton of fun doing them. We wanted to kind of keep that going. So Kelly came up with this great idea of, hey, we both like a lot of the same music, but we're both so into music. There's so much stuff that we're both into that the other one might not be familiar with. It kind of be cool to recommend albums to each other that, had an impact on us and kind of see where the other person falls on it. So as soon as he said this, I started going in my head like, all right, I listen to some really strange stuff, a lot of like obscure, noise recordings and things like that. And I was like, all right, I'm not going to go crazy on the first one because I don't want to scare Kelly away from this super awesome idea that he had. So I'm going to pick something that's sort of a little more poppy, a little more upbeat, some catchy toe tapper kind of numbers. So an obvious choice is the album Suicide by Vaughn.
I knew I'd be exposed to interesting stuff, and I was here, but this spoiler, I enjoyed this. I enjoyed this album quite a bit.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And for anybody, if you're a big squatty, as I'm sure you are, if you're sticking with us through this. So on Squat Cobbler, there was an episode where Kelly and I each recommended a compilation album. Kelly's was a Tony OK compilation album, and mine was a Vaughn compilation album. And those became our first two Prisoner Exchange albums. So that's kind of a cool tie-in that wasn't something that was planned, I don't believe, at least just kind of happened that way. And for me personally, choosing Vaughn was a really kind of important thing. So for anybody who doesn't know, Vaughn was one of the bands of the Norwegian artist Mortis, who started his career in the metal band Emperor, who were really influential on the black metal and death metal scene. And then he went and started doing his namesake band, which is still around and is a very popular, very successful band called Mortis. When Mortis started, their early material, which fans now classify as era 1 of the band, was what he calls dungeon music. So it was atmospheric, almost ambient, but with sort of a medieval kind of vibe to it. Dungeon music is a very appropriate way to describe the early Mortis stuff. During that period, though, he was working on some other stuff that didn't fit that kind of overall theme. So he started a couple of side projects to start working some of that material out and getting that out. One of those side projects, and my actual personal favorite body of work of his, is his side project Vaughn. Vaughn started with a 7-inch, then there were 3 full-length albums, and then there was an abandoned album that up until recently remained unreleased for years called AIDS to the People, that was meant to be an EP. And people assume that either there was nothing really said about it, and he had made some sort of a comment in an interview at some point that, AIDS to the People, the direction that the namesake band Mortis eventually went in, was sort of where Vaughn was going to go anyway. Mortis started to move away from the sort of dungeon music into more of an industrial rock kind of vibe. So he said that's sort of where it would have went. So people either assume that AIDS to the People was never really finished, or those songs were just reworked into Mortis songs at some point. And Vaughn, in comparison to, I would say, the popularity of Mortis, is a much lesser known project. What they're best known for, though, is the full-length debut album Suicide, and unfortunately not so much for the music, but for the packaging. On the cover, you have Mortis holding a knife up to someone, and there's some of the artwork inside involves, cutting and blood and things like that. And in the original pressings, if you were lucky enough to get one, because they were pulled from stores very quickly, taped to the vinyl record was an actual razor blade. Of course, some people, between the album being called Suicide and having a little bit of a dark vibe to it, combined with the artwork, some stores were a little bit worried about the overall message that this was sending.
Yeah, I can imagine the stores having kind of multiple things to think about with the packaging. It is a striking, attention-getting cover in black and white. I think that was a really, really good call. My minor quibble is this album's not called Murder. It's called Suicide. and so appears to be more of the album art cover for Murder versus Suicide. But you know, if you get past that, it's striking imagery, black and white.
Yes, and unfortunately, when it was initially pulled, so now if you go and you find a digital copy of this now, you get the original cover. For a long time, though, after the album was initially pulled, it was reissued with completely different cover and artwork. It was a white cover with a picture of a tree on it, and the album was retitled to take the title of the fourth and there's only 4 tracks on this album. They're a little on the long side. So the first track is Suicide. The last track on the album is called Release Your Grief. And that was what the album was retitled for the reissue. So for a long time, that's all that was available. So when I got a copy of this album, so I was aware that Mortis was in Emperor because Emperor is such an influential band. But getting into the dungeon side of Mortis really came from a friend of mine, Patrick, who owned a record store here in Philadelphia. And he was a show promoter. So he put together a lot of shows that early bands of mine were a part of. And even if I wasn't a part of it, I would go to all of the shows he put together. But through his record store, that was a spot where a lot of us would meet up and he would introduce us to a lot of music. So he actually got me into the dungeon side of things. And he told me, like, you know, there's a weirder, darker side to this. And I was like, there's a weirder, darker side to a guy who makes dungeon music. And at that time, Mortis was wearing like heavy makeup and even prosthetic pieces on his face and stuff like that. So I was like, there's a darker, weirder side to this. And he's like, yeah, it's called Vond. So I searched out the Suicide album. Unfortunately, I was only able to initially get the Release Your Grief reissue of it. All of the content on the album itself, though, was the same. So you want to jump into it, sir?
I am ready if you are.
Okay. So the first song is the title track, Suicide. Pretty upbeat number. What were your thoughts, sir?
It's about a third of the album. They're all longish songs, but this one takes up the vast majority of it, and it's time well spent. I mean, there's a lot that goes on. It is so it's dark ambient. You almost have this kind of rural Nordic tonality kind of running through the whole thing, and it with starting off with some of these kind of organ variations and a motif and some bells, and then about a third of the way through you do get, and this is the only song on the whole album that has any lyrics whatsoever.
Correct.
These lyrics are not in English, and so I do know that Selvmord is said a couple times at the end, so I know he's saying suicide at the end a couple times, but they're very sparse lyrics anyway, but they kind of make their way through about a third of the way through the song. Tempo increases up a little bit briefly, goes into kind of almost a second motif that's slightly brighter, and then brings that first pick. So it's, we on our first Prisoner Exchange, you talked about you like medleys, and that I wouldn't describe this as a medley, but this is something that thematically kind of sets the tone, moves along a little bit, and kind of returns to it at the end. I think this is a really impressive piece of music, and I enjoy it quite a bit. It is just over 18 minutes long. It kind of goes through kind of several evolutions as it goes through, and I really, it's my favorite track on the album, and I just thought it was a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, this is actually my favorite track as well. And like Kelly said, it's a longer track. So anyone who knows Mortis now, they're more of an industrial, like hard rock metal type of band. And he does vocals in the band as well. In the early days of Mortis, though, when he was doing the dungeon style music, or what fans refer to as Era 1, there was little or no vocals, pretty much none. And when there was vocals, it was usually guest vocalists that he would bring in to do sort of like choral style, almost like layering in like some texture to the songs, not so much lyrics. When you get into this song, when the spoken word segment comes into this, it's really unexpected, because up until this point, Emperor had Aishin as a singer, who's a famous, not just from Emperor, but a well-known solo artist with his own namesake band as well. But you had never heard Mortis do any sort of vocals. And the Mortis albums that were out at that point, to the best of my knowledge, had no vocals. I think it was later Era 1 material that had that sort of built into it. I'm sure I'm wrong about that, and somebody's gonna on the comments be like, bad word, your beard. But probably the same guy.
But they'll do it in like Danish, so we won't know.
Yeah, probably the exact same guy. So it really kind of catches you off guard. What's cool about this, though, what's different about Vond, even though again it's long songs, sort of evolving recurring motifs in the tracks, which is similar to the Dungeon era Mortis stuff, these are different. The Dungeon era Mortis stuff it sounds big, it sounds echoey. It almost sounds like something you would hear as a score on a battle scene of a fantasy movie, or at the very least an actual dungeon torture scene. These songs are, while they're I don't want to say they're sparse. They're more stripped down than that though. Like a lot of this is just repetitive keyboard motifs with different effects and instruments sort of layered in to bring it up and down when it's needed, sort of to build the peaks and valleys of the individual songs. And like Kelly said, this is a particularly long song. I remember, so I'm very old for anyone who's younger listening to this. I'm 35 years old. So I remember traveling to work by train with a Discman, which was like a giant iPod that you stuck a CD into. You can Google a CD and find out what that was. And I had the Release Your Grief version of this on CD, and I would put that into my Discman and listen to the song Suicide on my way into work often. So, which actually now makes it sound like I had a lot of issues that I should have dealt with at that time.
It's not the only thing. So.
Anything else though you have to add to this track, sir?
No, as I said, I think it's my favorite. I think what you kind of hit on in terms of kind of more some of the Era 1 stuff and what that might kind of fit into, and that what I was kind of struck is almost when you think about some of the immersive video game kind of things. So I'll go with like a BioShock, which musically already has plenty going on in an awesome way. But as I kind of got through this whole album, I kind of said, This bad boy could have been playing back behind BioShock the whole time.
Yeah, definitely. And all of the early Mortis and Vond stuff too, or this record of Vond, one of the things that I really like about Vond is, especially if you take the 3 full-length albums, and the final release of AIDS to the People is technically full-length, but what it is it's actually the unreleased AIDS to the People EP, and then the original demo 7-inch. And that's why when I made that recommendation, what I liked about it is you sort of heard the beginning and end of Vond as a band. But each of the 3 proper full-length albums from Vond is completely different. So the very next album is a totally different animal, and the same thing with the third one. Sonically, totally different approach, different tone, everything. Which I really liked. And that was one of the kind of cool things, picking up each Vond album and not really knowing what it was going to be. This is probably the closest to the Era 1 Mortis stuff, but like I said, it's almost like stripped down. And really what's different tonally about it is there is that sort of like epic fantasy kind of element to the Dungeon era Mortis stuff, whereas this is kind of darker and more atmospheric. Like it's not as big sounding. Like this is something that's a little more stripped down, something that's more, like Kelly said, would be great for something like BioShock or something like that, where you're building tension.
Yeah, and when you talk about the differences in the releases, so as I kind of got through this, I was kind of just poking around and checking out other things, and came across Parasite God as another Mortis song, and no relation whatsoever. Cool song, very cool song, but a whole different world, but good stuff. But yeah, you definitely see huge changes in kind of what's going on.
Yeah, and so through the Mortis catalog, you have the Era 1 Dungeon stuff. Parasite God is from an album called Smell of Rain, which that's where the Era thing started, because people started calling that Era 2, because that was when he started doing lead vocals and it was more of a band type thing. And now they're into what a lot of fans refer to as Era 3, where it's a significantly heavier project, bringing some of that original sort of metal element back into it. Currently, though, that I'm not one to ever discuss myself or anything I might vaguely be involved with on this show.
Never.
So obviously I'm not even necessarily comfortable saying this because this is so out of character for me. But currently Mortis is actually doing Era 1 style music for a handful of like special live shows to celebrate the 30th anniversary of his music projects and things like that. And he'll actually be doing a remix of a Pagan track. So that should be something pretty interesting to look forward to if you guys check this out and you're into it. But yeah, so he is doing some of the Era 1 stuff again. Unfortunately, there's no US shows announced yet. I'm hoping he comes out here so I can. There is great video though on YouTube of the current Era 1 style shows that he's doing.
Very cool. So I hate to ask, but what song is he doing a remix of?
So we're still deciding on that, but as of us discussing this right now, I think it's going to be Scarlet Seduction.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
Yeah, I was trying to think of a song that like he could. Again, I'm a big fan of all of his work, so I'm pretty familiar with his style. I was trying to think of a song that he could really dig into the most and just really go crazy with, and that's a song that has a lot of weird, kind of layered things in there. But moving along. The second track on this album. Now, this is where it's getting a little bit shaky. So on the album, the titles for only this one, every other Mortis and Vaughn release, the tracks are in English. And he speaks perfect English, as most people around the world speak multiple languages except for us Americans. This is the only one where the titles are actually in Norwegian, and I couldn't get a smooth translation of this. I keep getting literal translations everywhere of this, and it doesn't quite work the way that the other ones do. So the actual literal title is When Life Takes Goodbye. So obviously that it just doesn't quite work. We're losing a little something in translation there. But what did you think of When Life Takes Goodbye?
Yeah. So this was the bonus homework I had to do for this because everything was in Norwegian. Is I was using the powerful Google Translate feature to at least get in the ballpark of it, and I got to When Life Takes Goodbye, where I go, I don't know if that's exactly right, but and so it I had to kind of try and decode most of these. But so I like this album as a whole. There isn't anything on this I dislike at all. I would say of everything that's on there, this is probably my least favorite of what's on here, but that's more because the other three are just stronger. Again, there is absolutely nothing wrong with this song at all. It's a great song, enjoyable, a great composition, I should say, I guess. It's interesting because this introduces kind of some nature, not for the last time, you get kind of this shore sound at the beginning of it. It's tighter in its, Mike mentioned before, there's a lot of motifs that kind of repeat through. We heard that in Suicide, that continues on pretty consistently through the album. It's tighter. It's almost got a droning nature to some of the repeats of it, and like I said, an enjoyable composition. I like the other three slightly better. So just kind of talking about the album as a whole, this would be of listening to them. This would be the fourth one I would go to typically, but and it's also happens to be the shortest song, clocking in just under 5 minutes. Still good, and I thought that part of it is the tighter repetition I did enjoy. The kind of droning-ish kind of aspect of it was pretty cool, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah, we're kind of on the same page on this one. Of the 4 tracks, and I know this album is new to you, but this is something I've been listening to for years and years. This is the song I revisit the least out of all of them. And it's not that I dislike it, it's just the other 3 are so strong. And I do think a part of it for me is the shorter length. Like, I like kind of getting into these songs and kind of letting them unfold and stuff like that. And this is the only song where, while you still get sort of the evolving motif and stuff like that, this is the only song where you don't kind of get lost in it the same way. And I think it's the length of it.
Yeah, it's odd. I mean, because again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this, but it does think when you're given a little more canvas to work with on some of these, they hang together almost a little bit better.
Yeah, I think the shorter. I wish the song was longer. That's my only quibble with it, which seems like a strange quibble probably for most people. Like, I just wish that song went on longer. But when you hear it against the other 3, it's the one that doesn't quite fit as well, just because of the shorter length to me.
Fair enough.
All right, and that brings us to the 3rd track, The Journey to a New World. What are your thoughts, sir?
Really, really enjoy the song. There's kind of unique to this album so far. Some of the music counterpoints that come through. This one comes in with kind of the deepest one, almost a roar that kind of permeates the first part of this. You get, again, kind of from a nature standpoint, some crash of thunder kind of thing, picking up into kind of more of a driving refrain. The most percussive of all of the tracks on here, which is kind of a cool new element to kind of introduce there. And it really almost, as it continues to build and go forward, almost kind of gets into a gallop at the end. And so it's a nice layering of what goes on, kind of unique moments from a sonic standpoint that we haven't had so far. And this one is almost a pure build in that it just kind of keeps kind of ratcheting it up, and you get to that kind of gallop at the end, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, we're very much on the same page on our takeaways from these songs, which is really, really cool and really interesting because this is new to you and it's not to me. But again, the main thing that I would talk about with this one is that sort of percussive build up in this, and that's what makes this song stand out from the other 3 tracks on here. And it seems weird to say, there's only 4 tracks on this, but this is a full length album. So you have to keep in mind that other than When Life Takes Goodbye, these are all long songs. So not as long as the title track Suicide, but these are all longer songs. So introducing a new percussive element to it when you have these sort of building motifs that you get with these tracks, it's a cool thing. And it just adds another layer and another texture to this.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely does.
Okay, and that brings us to the 4th and final track on here, Release Your Grief, which for a lot of people that when they were introduced to this album, unless you got the initial pressing or you're picking it up now with the reissue, Release Your Grief was the actual title of the album that you got. And there was a little sticker on the front that explained the situation that, there was controversy over the title and the packaging. So the album was pulled and reissued, but the contents of the album itself, it's the same 4 tracks, same order, nothing changed on the tracks. So what are your thoughts on Release Your Grief, sir?
So the most challenging of titles for me to do some deciphering on, because the Google Translate takes, and forgive me, but the title is Slip Sorgen Loss. That if you take that title and you paste it into Google and ask it to translate it, it's going to give you Release Sorgen Loss. And so I was like, okay, so release, I got a word. So then I began to search on Sorgen Loss. Was this a criminal? Was this, what's going on? Is this a protest song? And I eventually got to some dramatic versions of Sorgen Loss, which deal a little bit more on the Kafka side, but that was almost carefree, not grief. So thank you for helping me understand what the title of this was.
And again, I don't speak Norwegian, so I'm getting this from other sites. So that could be totally wrong.
We can go with it. Sounds like a good title. I can work with it.
Sounds like it fits with the album.
Yeah, it seems to be a good thing. Another song that builds structurally. It is probably the simplest in structure of all of these. It clocks in again around 10 minutes. It's a good length to it from there. And you can kind of correct me if I'm wrong here, and you talked earlier about a lot of the synth organ kind of stuff going on early in the album. That's predominant through much of this, obviously. I think this, we actually got some fairly clean piano in this, which again becomes kind of a different moment, adds different texture to the album. So this one's like a little less complex, still brings it home with a great build and all that kind of stuff. I would put obviously the title track and Journey to a New World is really, really great complex pieces of work. This one is very solid too. Slightly simpler, nothing wrong with that. Thought the piano edition was kind of cool, and so I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I like the piano as well. It is a little bit simpler in composition than the track that came before it. I think it's a great way to end the album though, and it brings it back, with the length and everything, and that sort of evolving motif format, almost like you got with the first track, Suicide. But Suicide is still my favorite. Suicide to me, sums up everything that you get out of this album in one track.
Yep, absolutely, and it's well worth the price of admission.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this album, sir. What do you think? So now we've done these 2 episodes are our first proper prisoner exchange. We did one of yours, one of mine. So what are your thoughts on this?
I will declare this fun for the second show. It's cool. I suppose this would not have been an album probably any time in the near future would I have done a deeper dive on and really had a chance to do it. It's always kind of good too to kind of hear a little of the backstory on here's why this is one I would offer up to somebody to kind of listen to and why. So I think had expectation that you and I like talking music a lot, obviously. And I thought that this would be kind of a good way where we're exposing each other to different elements of some things and kind of, things that we're passionate about. So I like how it's going. We mentioned in the last show, we're also taking requests so that if somebody has something they want Mike and I to kind of go through, we will take those recommendations. And as Mike mentioned on the last show too, if you want to put us way out of our comfort zone, that is more than fine. We talked briefly last show about Mel, our friend who I podcast with on Nurture and Sport, maybe coming in. Mike and I both have a hunch it's going to be cello based. We'll see. She assured me it probably wouldn't be. She did, however, make an aside to say, maybe I'll make you listen to a Taylor Swift album, which I wouldn't appreciate, but
I think it's strange that she thinks I haven't listened to a Taylor Swift album.
Maybe she's just trying to punish me more. I'm not sure. We will take those recommendations if they come, and we'll do them regardless of who you're recommending.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to more of these. And I don't know about you, but I think I have my next one ready to go.
I'm not quite ready yet. We'll chat offline about that, and we'll line up a couple more. And like I said, if you enjoyed this, let us know. Also, if you got recommendations, let us know. And we're thanks for listening.
Thanks, everybody.
So it's